I step away from the internet for like 1 day and a half-ish and come back and find out that a comedian who I like pretty well, John Mulaney, has done... Louis C.K. did this recently. It's so weird to me. Someone in the comments tell me if this is normal to have a comedian like randomly show up, like a super famous comedian randomly show up to an event that people have already paid for to see someone else. Like Louis C.K. did this recently where it was a surprise. He was not expected to be there. If I'm not mistaken, both of these shows were also venues at which people were meant to hand in their phones when they came in, so nobody could record what happened. Very creepy, very weird, very sus, in my opinion. So the first time this happened was Louis C.K., but like, honestly, I'm not surprised that the guy who is multiply accused of exposing himself sexually then went on to do a surprise appearance to an audience that could very well have been like actively hostile because of his shitty rapey behavior. Like that was not so much of a surprise for me. I'm like, okay, Louis C.K., creepy guy, exposes himself. It's perfectly within character for him to then show up randomly for a show that people had paid to see something else. But now, like John Mulaney, who I have previously thought is like a pretty funny person, has also gone around and like invited Dave Chappelle to do the same thing at one of his shows, to be one of the opening sets for John Mulaney for a show in Columbus, Ohio. Another fucking event where people were like not allowed to bring in their phones so that they couldn't record it. To an extent, I get it when because John Mulaney might be very well like doing a tour that is going to then be a special later, you know, so that I can kind of get it, like not wanting them to have their phones. It's just still weird to me to do this like surprise venue shit. Like it's weird. People were initially surprised and off-put by Dave Chappelle's surprise appearance anyway. That on its own, I find to be an issue. I don't like that. And then even more so on top of that Dave Chappelle, like apparently his entire career now is just making trans jokes. He's just decided that he has a vendetta against us now, and he's just going to continue to rile us up so that he's not being canceled, to be clear. This is his ticket. In his middle age, as he is like losing influence, basically losing notoriety as an aging comedian, he has to find something. And it seems that it's pretty common now for that thing that people find to be just transphobic jokes. To be clear, I think there is a distinction to be made between, like, there are jokes that can be made at the expense of trans people that are not transphobic. Okay? I don't think that Dave Chappelle is good at trans jokes. Like, here's the thing. He's not funny. Like, he's not good at it. In order to make a joke about something, you have to be knowledgeable enough about it in order to make it funny. And when you are a plebeian and you know nothing, your jokes are not funny. They're just offensive. What they boil down to is pointing and laughing at the group for existing. This is the problem of consequence. Don't come at me about like, oh, you're so sensitive or whatever. Like, I love comedy that makes fun of people and that does it well. I love comedy that is good. Okay? I think Dave Chappelle doesn't know enough about this to be funny, and that his tragic mistake is that he's going to keep trying to dip into this well and just gonna keep pissing people off. But that's profitable for him. He's making money. It's not a problem for him. He's being canceled, but always just making more and more and more money. So what actually are the content of the jokes? How could we possibly know? Because they took people's phones and people are saying like, oh, there's transphobic jokes. Like, okay, well, I'm not surprised by that, okay? But as you all know about me at this point in my streaming career, I do tend to want to find out for myself what actually happened and judge for myself whether the thing was actually problematic, right? Having not had people's phones at the event, all we can really go off of are people recounting verbally after the fact online what was supposedly said. Right now, I have pulled up this article. This one is pretty brief. We'll find another one that goes into more detail. Oh yeah, his recent encounter at the Hollywood Bowl with a stage crasher, where some person had come up on stage. Now I know that he's already joked about this, but he was saying like, oh, supposedly they attacked me with a weapon. Like, oh, I mean, it wasn't a gun, it was a knife, a gun that identifies as a knife. So he makes the identifies as joke, the one joke. They have one joke. They're so funny. But Mulaney hugged Chappelle at the end of the set. And I guess Mulaney also made comments about how Chappelle was like one of his best friends or whatever. Like, okay, whatever, fine. Now we have this over here. This is screenshots from someone who allegedly was there at the event. This person gives trigger warnings for transphobia, racism, implied rape, bestiality, not safe for work mentions. Dave Chappelle, obviously. Trigger warning, Dave Chappelle. So here we go. Okay, so I went to see John Mulaney at Red Rocks. There was a surprise opener. It was Dave fucking Chappelle. The second he came on stage, I was scared, By the time he was done, I thought I was going to throw up. My sister actually left and had a breakdown. I don't have a video because of phone locks, but here's as exact a transcript as I can manage. Trigger warnings ahead for previously described content. I had a special come out a little while ago. People who got upset by it, I guess they didn't listen all the way until the end because I didn't really have a problem with trans people. I really don't. But I do now. Cue uproarious laughter. Uproarious laughter. And there was such a backlash, I mean an uproar, and now I can't tell jokes about transgender people ever again, and I won't. On TV, if I were to tell my producers, hey, I identify as Chinese, and then I came in with offensive Ching Chong impression, and the one Chinese guy there was like, this isn't right. I hate this shit. Like, oh yeah, one woman in the room saying, I think that trans people are a caricature of women, therefore we're just gonna accept that. Like, this man truly just believes that trans women are men, and that like cis women are correct in expressing their particular bigoted anxiety about it. Or what if I were sent to prison and I'd say, no man, I'm a woman, I identify as a woman, I'm going to women's prison, and guess the first thing I'd do when I got in there? Say, yeah, you bitches better do my laundry or I'm gonna. And then later to a disabled girl in the front row. This is disgusting, by the way. Like, I'm giving you my own personal trigger warning. I think this is really uncomfortable and not okay. To the disabled girl in the front row, asks, so does that dog actually help with anything or just keep you company? And then asks, do you think if he put a little peanut butter down there, yeah, I bet he would. He'd help you out. You ever put a little peanut butter down there? You ever done that? That's fucked up. And I've heard more than one person say that this was an illusion made during the show. Yeah, really fucking uncool. And then he asks, like, can he pick stuff up? Can he pick up beer bottles? He can. I'll give you $700 for that dog right now. And then later on, to two girls in the audience, he says, hey, you girls, boys, does it even matter anymore? The transcript does not include other jokes comparing Ukraine to Vietnam, jokes about Russia's ineffectiveness as though he wants them to succeed, or John Mulaney's post-set comments about Dave being one of his best friends. TLDR, I was forced to see Dave Chappelle. His jokes included comparing trans people to racists and rapists. He also encouraged a disabled person in the audience to force her service dog to perform oral sex on her. So TLDR, that was not good. That's about as much detail as I've been able to find so far. Yeah, I did not expect, like, whoa, really uncool, I think, to comment on an audience member's body like that. Like, wow. Really, really, really uncool. Like, sexually uncomfortable in a situation where you have power because you're on stage. I really hate that I have to keep talking about this. And I hate that there are people who are going to respond to this later and say, like, oh, you don't know what was actually said. Like, well, that's your boy's fault for being a fucking weirdo and like not allowing people to have their phones in. Like, that makes it really easy to skew the narrative, doesn't it? It really makes it easy to point at these audience members and say, that's not what actually happened. You're making shit up. If they actually release it later, then we can look at it. You know, if they were recording the set. I doubt it, though. Because he said, oh, I'm not going to tell, like, so he allegedly said, I'm not going to tell this joke on TV. Like, that implies that he's deliberately telling these jokes in areas where people are not going to have the power to fight back against it. You can't adequately address what was said and what was done when there's no record. You know, you can't hold him directly accountable if they're like basically creating a situation where it's necessarily a he said, she said, or like you didn't hear the tone of voice, so you didn't know that it was actually meant in this other way. Oh, this thing, maybe the text of what he said, whatever, but like his tone was clearly sarcastic, you know? It's really easy. I will also point out there were some people saying like, oh, you could just leave. You could just leave and demand your money back. But apparently this stadium, the theater that they were at, was like 12,000 seats and sold out and completely pitch black during the sets, and there were no ushers. So it would have been quite an ordeal, apparently, to like get out, especially if people wanted to leave during his set and then come back to see the set that they had paid for, which was John Mulaney. I don't know if I would want to stay and see John Mulaney if I knew that he had invited Chappelle to do an opening for his show, but that is what people paid for, and I wouldn't blame them if they wanted to leave and stay in the lobby for Dave Chappelle's show and then go in, enjoy the show that they had paid for. And like, this is the part that, like, as much as I am not a person who's like, oh, capitalism is good, like, I do still think that you should respect if people, like, if I paid to go see a comedian that I liked, I would be so fucking upset if I then had to deal with this situation of being surprised by a known transphobic comedian coming on to then make jokes and inappropriate comments about people's bodies and the same fucking hearty heart attack helicopter jokes, like, I am over it. I've been out as trans for 13 years and I'm over it. I'm disappointed because I have really appreciated John Mulaney's comedy in the past. I thought that it was relatively light, and it's unfortunate that his like support of someone and like being willing to spring this surprise on people when you know that there's people who are going to be upset. And if you have 12,000 people in a theater, there are going to be trans people in that audience. Like, do you earnestly think that there are no trans people who are a fan of you or who would pay to show up at your show? You're just like, I don't care about you and your humanity. Like, I would much rather show a public support to my friend who has like said a lot of negative shit about your community than have you be a fan of my comedy. Like, you being a fan of my comedy requires you accepting that I don't care about your human experience, basically. Unfortunate. Don't have heroes, kids. Don't enjoy things, I guess. Do enjoy things, just don't get too attached to the creators of those things. Not a big deal. Thank you all for watching, and I want to especially thank my patrons. Your support is enabling me to pursue this as my actual job, so thank you so much for your contributions. I want to especially thank Mersh Rolvag, Tiago Nascimento, Jovian F. Gaudreau, Bean, Heather Clarkson, Amanda B., Sarah A., R. Halverson, Michelle Winter, Athiette, Wellington Marcus, Nova, Frozen Summers, Suzanne Maynard, Elizabeth Bartell, and Mr. Atheist.